Welcome, everyone. This is our second night for our Austin WiA Women in Architecture Call to Action series. So this is our second year doing it. It is our salon series, and it is called 2020 Hindsight, Things We Wish We Knew When We Were in Architecture School. And I am the chair for the subcommittee. My name is Janky DePalma. I'm going to share my screen with just some welcome slides, and then we're going to have some fun today. All right, give me a thumbs up if anyone can see this.
Yes, we can
Perfect.
see it, Janky.
All right, so today's discussion is 2020 hindsight. What surprised me most those first 2 years? And before I do that, I want to, there we are. This is exactly 2020 hindsight, what we wish we would have known before graduating architecture school. The WiA's call to action subcommittee, our mission is to identify and remove obstacles for anyone who is interested in architecture. And this series in particular is a virtual salon series that we've been doing that just talks about all the topics that we think, I wish we had known about this earlier. And we kind of couch it under this like umbrella of 2020 hindsight. And we keep it virtual because we want as many students as possible to be able to attend. And we know coming into Austin, one that limits the number of students, but also just, can be difficult. So we want to keep this open and accessible to as many people as possible. And none of that could happen if it weren't for our amazing WiA sponsors. I want to thank all these firms and individuals who really do help support our committee, which is part of the AIA Austin. And it also really just helps us kind of move our WiA mission forward, which is to amplify and elevate women in our industry. So with that, let's get talking about today's topic. Like I said, it is what surprised me most those first 2 years. I'm going to do a really quick introduction of our moderator and our speakers, and I'm also just going to give you a little bit of housekeeping. If you weren't able to attend yesterday's session, you missed out, but it's okay. Today's session, what I'm going to do is we're going to be talking for about an hour. So at the top of the hour, we're going to actually officially open it up to questions. But when you have questions, just pop it in the chat, because at the top of that hour, I will scroll through there and keep that open. So if an idea comes to you, can feel free to do that. And while I'm introducing my speakers, for my attendees, put down what schools you're in. I'm really curious who's represented today. So let's get started with introductions. So this topic in particular is such a fun one because I think it is one that helps look at expectations versus reality. In those first 2 years, there's a lot of expectations and reality sort of intersection. So moderating is Pooja Harris. She is a friend of mine. She is over an associate at O'Connell Robertson. And funny enough, last year we did a topic very similar called What to Expect Those First Few Years. And Pooja was one of the speakers. So now I feel like she's graduated to being a moderator leading this discussion. But I think you could also share your first few years. We're still in the rearview mirror, so you can definitely chime in on this. Pooja, let me just go pull up her resume. So Pooja is one of the unicorns that's actually from Austin, but went to school in Boston. She got her bachelor's at Northeastern, and then she later got her master's at the University of Houston. Go Cougs. We have several Cougs in our midst. Then I have Kassandra Lee. She is at FGM Architects, and Kassandra went to UT, and she had her bachelor's of architecture as well as a minor in business. Very exciting. Then I have Miren Urena, who is at Boca Powell. Miren is actually our incoming emerging professionals chair. And she also went to the University of Texas. So got those Longhorns representing. And then finally is Tess Wright. Tess actually works with me at Kirksey Architecture. She's in our Houston office. And she went to the University of Houston and is the incoming WiA chair for WiA Houston. So I'm very excited to hear what they all have to say. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Pooja. I'm going to stop sharing. You can all see everyone's bright and shiny faces.
Thanks, Janky, for that introduction. I'm excited to get started today. So I'm going to start with Kassandra, and then I'll go Tess, Miren. So first off, want to hear your origin story. When did you first think you wanted to pursue architecture as a career? Cassandra.
Yeah, of course. So strangely enough, I've always had a interest in architecture from a very young age. As a little girl, I was obsessed with my mother, as we all are at a very young age. So she used to work downtown in my hometown in Laredo, Texas, and there's a lot of historic buildings down there. And I would always, when I was with her in the car, I would always reimagine what some of the abandoned buildings were like and what they could be, because they were such beautiful buildings. They had so much character, and I felt like it was just a little bit of a wasted space, unfortunately. And I always saw such a beauty in that downtown area. So even though at a young age, I couldn't even give you a how old I was, but yeah, at a very young age, that was kind of in my mind, like, why isn't anybody doing this? Maybe I can do this. Like, is this a possibility for me? So I kind of got it in my head that I was going to become an architect, and I didn't really define what that was though until I was in college. I was always attracted. I was always pulled towards mathematics and mathematic theories. So I was debating if I should go into architectural engineering or architecture. And I did a couple years of architectural engineering, and I realized that my passion was more towards architecture after experiencing that.
Nice. I love that idea of, oh, I realized I'm thinking about things a little bit differently than everybody else. And maybe that's exactly the type of thought process one needs to be an architect. So cool. All right, Tess, what about you? What was your origin story about pursuing architecture as a career?
So a little different, but I grew up playing with Lincoln logs my whole life and building things out of literally anything I could find. I would run around the woods and build forts and shelters out of sticks and twigs and everything else. But I first discovered I wanted to be an architect actually when I was picking majors for college applications. I thought about psychology because I was always fascinated with the human brain. And then there was one opportunity that I had and I took it, which was a senior class in my high school, which was architecture. And so my parents were like, we think you'd be really good at this. You love art, you love math, and this is kind of a combination of both, with the added bonus of geometry, which how fun, right? And so I took the class, applications already sent into colleges, and I loved it. So I never looked back since.
Nice. Yeah, mine was definitely similar to that of I got to pick a major, so what am I interested in, I guess. What about you, Miren? What was your reason for pursuing architecture as a career?
So, mine is pretty similar also, like Tess, but I have a funny story where when I was like maybe like a freshman or like maybe ending middle school, like I said, we need to start thinking about what our careers, what do we want out of life? And I was always very interested in animation and drawing, but as everybody knows, that's a very difficult life to pursue. And so my dad, he loves buildings, he loves architecture, and he brought up that what if I pursue architecture since I like art and I like math? And I was like, adamantly, no. I was like gonna be no, I'm not gonna become an architect. That's not something I'm not really interested in buildings, and that's a big no. So high school continues on, and lo and behold, we had to select something. Now, that being said, all of my family is originated from Mexico. I did my elementary and middle school in Mexico. And so doing high school in the US was a different world to me. We were new to everything, how the college process worked. And so at the end, I was like, you know what? I want to become a lawyer. And so as I start actually researching about being a lawyer, a lot of people will recommend actually selecting a career and not just like go to like civic classes or like the government minor. So you could just graduate 4 years and then go to your to law degree. And I was like, well, what if I do with something with more purpose? And the architecture was like lingering there. So I was like, you know what? What's the architecture? I went blind towards it. And you know, I enjoyed my architectural school life, but I've enjoyed better my architecture as now working. But that's basically my life as an architect beginning.
That's awesome. And I mean, that honestly sets us up for the next question, which is what did you think being a young architect would be like, and where did you get that idea? Was it, a couple of us went into it just like, I don't know, that sounds fine, and or parents saying some stuff, and or movies or TV, or was it not until you were in college and your professors were talking to you that you really started grasping an idea of what you think it's going to be like when you get out into that world? If anyone wants to take that, Kassandra.
Yeah. So I think I didn't really know what being a young architect was even in college. I kind of got the idea that I knew aspects of architecture and kind of what the blanket idea was. We're designing buildings and making spaces look nice. But other than that, I didn't really get a good grasp. I think I heard a lot of horror stories when I was in college that I was anticipating and thankfully haven't encountered yet. So yeah, I thought it was I didn't really have a great idea of what being a young architect would be like until like late in my college career, and everything that I thought architecture was going to be like really scary and really hungry. It's not necessarily that. It's quite pleasant. So
I think I'm gonna jump into that. I bet you part of the horror stories, at least I heard when I was in UT, was that you're not gonna be doing what you're doing in school. Like it's gonna be something completely different, and it begs a question about what the School of Architecture also needs to do to prepare students for the real world of architecture, because UT is very focused on design and making programmatic, all that stuff. And then they would always say like, oh yeah, but you're going to go into the office and you're just going to be designing stairs, or you're just going to be designing the toilets, nothing of the fun, quote unquote, stuff that you do in the architecture school. And I think probably one of the things that we're going to talk about later here at the panel is all the different sides that architecture has to offer. And as you move into it, you are going to find your little niche or whatever you feel the most comfortable with.
And to echo off of both what Kassandra and Miren said, but architecture does have a bad rap at times for like things like pigeonholing. I think Miren, you touched on that. Things like that. And of course, that certainly does happen, but not everywhere. And you do have to find your niche, right? You can look at it like the big scary stories, or you can take like a Ted Mosby look on things, if anybody gets that reference, and find what you love and just chase it. And I think that's what most people here have done, at least, and found their niche and just chased it until they got it. So.
On the Ted Mosby thing, I thought it was so interesting. When I watched How I Met Your Mother, I didn't even like realize he was an architect until like a decent amount. And and there's like movies where they're like, oh yeah, Brady Bunch dad, he was an architect. I'm like, right. I did not notice any of these portrayals of architects. I'm glad I didn't, because I think they were wrong for the most part. Like,
I think they're very underrepresented in media,
yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, mm-hmm. definitely a skewed representation for sure. So next, just wanted to ask if anyone had any internships while they were in school. So, you maybe have that professor influence, but was there actual experience that you were having in school? See, Tess?
Yeah. So I got an internship between my third and fourth year in school. And so it was kind of early for some people, but I know most go between fourth and fifth. And it was like a little mom and pop shop. 4 people total, including myself. 2 of us were interns. And I use the term intern just as the AIA defines it. It's not a negative connotation. Just I'll put that out there because I'll keep saying it. So, but intern, and so I got basically my first taste of a real architecture office in that setting. And all we were doing day in and day out are construction drawings for Dunkin' Donuts. And so you learn very quickly what a drawing set should look like and what it shouldn't. And so I did that for a year, and then I applied for the Kirksey summer internship between fourth and fifth year and transitioned there the following year. And I've been there since. So I
Oh, so
think,
that's,
go ahead.
sorry, continue. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, I think to anybody in school, if you can handle it or you can manage it, I think internships are the best way to get you real world experience and kind of help you to figure out where you want to be too coming out of school. And not all your peers will get that, right? Not everybody will be able to take on an internship during school. But if you have the opportunity, I would highly suggest it. It benefits you so much.
So especially having interns somewhere, it sounds like you were somewhere else besides Kirksey, your first internship, and then you were at Kirksey, and now you're actually at Kirksey. So how do you feel like those experiences compared to what you're actually doing after graduating?
So I actually my parents also they said that we think you'd be really good at a small firm because you can wear a lot of hats and you can basically kind of have your finger in all the pies, right? And so I did the small firm thing. It was 4 people, and then I couldn't pass up the opportunity at Kirksey, and I found that in the right place, I thrived. So it's the way it's set up. It's kind of like smaller teams, and so I do get to have a finger in all the pies still, and it still kind of functions that way, but with a large firm backing you, basically. And so by doing the internship, I was able to kind of test it out and say, okay, do I really want to do the large firm, or do I want to kind of backtrack and go to a smaller firm? And so to me, it's invaluable having done that.
Yeah, totally. I didn't personally do a summer internship, but at Northeastern we do co-ops, and something I kind of learned from my not architecture peers, the other students and other programs, was they tended to test their co-op a lot more than the architecture students. Architecture students were very traditional firm immediately. So I definitely ventured out a little bit with my co-ops to just kind of test the waters. And I think internships and co-ops are great opportunities for that, because you have the excuse that you're leaving at the end either way. So if you didn't like it in the end, it's okay. You're not locked in for a long period of time. You don't feel like you have to stay there, and there's no hard feelings at all. So if you're able to, it's a great opportunity, but I know it can be hard to do the summer internships depending on different factors. So Kassandra, Miren, did either of you do an internship?
Go ahead, Kassandra.
I did do an internship, but I guess it's not technically like it wasn't an architectural internship. I did a construction internship, and in many ways there were parallels, because there was a lot of problem solving and then applying the method that you solved, or the problem that you solved. So it gave me perspective of how architectural drawings, I did see a lot of architectural drawings, but it gave me perspective of how construction workers view architectural drawings. So although it didn't parallel very well with how we run things at an architecture firm, I think it did give me a different perspective.
Do you feel like it was still worth your time to have put in the effort to have a construction focused internship instead of doing something else with your summer?
Oh, 100%. I think that being able to be on site, I was still learning how to read drawings. So it 100% helped me in the real world.
Yeah, totally.
And being on site that early too.
Yeah.
Right? Being able to see it go up before you even knew how to do the drawings. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I'm not gonna lie.
Miren, what about you? Did you have an internship while you were in school?
I wasn't very lucky with my internships. One time I tried to and I didn't get accepted. That's okay. And then but my sob story is that UT has what they call the residency program where they're able to pair you up with a firm and you do it for like 6 months. And it's a wonderful experience and I was really excited to do it. For some reason, I was the only one in the class who didn't actually get paired up with the firm. I was back then, it wasn't worth it moving to another city to go somewhere else. And so I was just trying to look somewhere local in Austin so I didn't have to change apartments and all that stuff. And back then, nobody was actually really hiring. So I know it wasn't really my fault. It was just the market at the time. But yeah, I didn't pursue an internship. But as Cassandra and like Tess, I think it is imperative that you do try to do an internship because when I had a friend who did her internship and she was like, after that, she was like, architecture is not for me. She realized she she did her internship and then she graduated and she was like, I am actually going to pursue being a doctor. And I think she went up to medical school. But she realized during her internship that that was definitely not from her. I don't know if the firm that she was working on just really wasn't her fit and maybe she needed to try something else, but she definitely felt it really passionately. So I do think that an internship is very, very important for you to decide if that's what you want to do, or like even Cassandra that she did in construction and maybe you are more interested in engineering. So I think it is imperative for you to do an internship. Yeah.
Yeah, you bring up a good point that like just because of your one internship experience, it's not indicative necessarily of the entire career. I mean, your friend going all the way to medical school, that sounds like she really something clicked that like this was not the right fit for her. But and to like Tess's point earlier of using your internship to test things and you know, not just asking those people at the firm that you're working at, like, is this what it's always like in the architecture world? They're gonna say yes, because that's where they work, you know. So you gotta try a different internship, talk to your peers that have internships elsewhere and see, hey, how do our experiences compare, and really get more information out of it that way. Tess, I had a follow-up question on your internship. Did you feel like you worked on things over your summer periods that were preparing you for what you ended up doing after graduating? Did you feel like you were doing mostly busy tasks? Like, how did it compare in that sense?
So, I'm a big believer you can learn from anything. So even if you're handed like a stack of red line drawings, and somebody just says, go do this, you have a choice in that moment to look at the red lines and just copy and paste and kind of forget about it, or take it and say, okay, somebody took the time to mark this up for me that has 5, 10 years more experience than me. They know something I don't know. What can I learn from this? And so I see Janky, but it you really do, like, you have a choice no matter where you are to learn from it. I took away as much as I possibly could from the Dunkin' Donuts. And while that was copy and paste, I started to learn a little bit more about wood construction, which is not something I do now, but I could still look back on a set of drawings and go, oh, okay, I recognize that. Or that looks wrong. I don't know why, but it looks wrong, and go find the problem, right? So short answer, yes.
Yeah, it's a really good. I'm a strong believer of that too. I can get frustrated when I'm working with people and they don't ask me the question. It's like, well, I would have been happy to explain that to you. I don't want to assume what you do or don't know. I want you to learn though. That's a big philosophy at my firm, I think, is like we want you to learn. That's the whole point, is that you're able to do these things. And something like a copy and paste Dunkin' Donuts prototype of something or so much easier, I think, as an intern to be able to grasp what's going on, especially because the people you're working with might know that project extra well. So it's not like totally new information for them. So moving on to another question, what was the most positive surprise in your work? Or what did you achieve that you didn't think you'd do physically? Something maybe you weren't necessarily expecting coming into your career, or I know for me, that might be phrased as something I was scared and was just telling myself, no, I'm sure it's not really like that, like the horror stories you hear in college. And then, oh yes, I was right. It's not like that. I'm totally fine, you know. Did anyone else have anything like that? I see some big nods.
I know that for me, I have two stories as I started because once I started at Book of Powell, I was like, okay, this is gonna be my first big job. I couldn't get an internship, nothing, so I'm going out of school into my first job. And so one of the things that made me laugh so hard in my first 2 weeks is that during the School of Architecture, when you're designing, at least I'm gonna just talk about UT for a moment. We were trying to design a project. Every time we had designed a project, we would always come up with a question. Oh, but where are people going to park? And the professor will only tell us like, oh, don't worry about that. Imagine that the people are just gonna park on the sides, and you just need to worry about your programmatic and your design. We're like, okay. Funny thing, as I start in Boca Powell, they're like, oh yeah, the first thing we need to do is actually design the parking garage because that's actually what's going to define the building. And I'm like mind blown because it was like this is basically the design was going to be based on the parking garage because of the property line and the zoning and everything. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. That's completely the opposite of what was doing in school. And then another thing is that be aware that um, like Tess was saying, as you're learning in your internships or even be aware that there are things that won't click until like 2 months in when you're working, and you might do it like details or plans, and people might explain it to you. I was very lucky that I've had really good mentors at Boca Powell, but it's like there's something in your brain where it finally clicks like, oh, this is what they're actually talking about. And repetition and asking questions is very, very important. But don't be afraid that if you're still perplexed or you're still confused, it might take some time to like, this is what's actually going on. So study, ask, and just, yeah, don't stress yourself too much about it.
Right. Cassandra, what about you? Was there a big positive surprise when you got to work?
Yeah, for sure. I think the biggest surprise that I had was, I guess going back to what we mentioned earlier, I was very from going from the horror stories and thinking that I was not my ideas and designs weren't really going to be considered. I think once I started working, I was fairly surprised about how people I work with encourage young architects to share their design ideas and to participate in early design stages. So I think that surprised me because I was always so afraid to, I think starting off, I was also very afraid that I would lose my love for architecture because I wasn't designing, and that's kind of how I was taught at UT. It was very design forward. And it was definitely a pleasant surprise to know that no matter what stage you are, no matter what your experience, there's value in ideas from all ranges. So
Totally.
I-
Yeah, I would agree. That's where you're gonna chime in there.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna answer. I I love the constant problem solving, which is not something I expected straight out of school. And kind of like what Cassandra was saying was ideas can come from everywhere. And being asked as an intern, right? Well, what do you think about this? Or what do you think? How do you think we can solve this problem? And it might be as simple as like how to route a duct up through the building and where to put it, but you're constantly solving problems and they relate back to the design always, right? And so that was the biggest good takeaway I had coming right out of school.
Yeah, totally. And honestly, like I'm sure it does depend on the firm. I wonder if all our professors went to some firms that just tortured you right out of school, or if that's just like a previous generation thing or what have you. But My first firm, I was definitely in a not glamorous project. It was apologized to by multiple people in the firm in the sense of like, oh, I'm sorry, I know this isn't like a very fun design project and you just got out of school. So it seemed like they weren't doing that intentionally. I'm in agreement with Tess, you can learn from anything. I actually really enjoyed learning on that project in little bite-sized pieces. But then at my next firm, when I started, it was very like, well, Pooja, it's your first day. What do you think of it? Like, they didn't say it's your first day, but it was my first day, and I was in a charrette. I was only a couple years out of grad school at that point, and so it's definitely nice to be asked. And then now being on the other side, it's like I love hearing what my interns and first year students have to say about anything because they're going to look at it differently. They're not getting bogged down with the same stuff that I'm getting bogged down in my head. Or to your point, Ted, there's a lot of problem solving. It's constant. I'm a little tired. Why don't you problem solve here? Why don't you let me know what you think of that? And you're gonna, rejuvenate things a little bit for us. So definitely agree with everybody on all of that. I feel like sort of relatedly to what I was just saying, I want to know what people think about office culture versus academia, maybe studio culture versus office culture. Does anyone have any thoughts on, I guess I'll start actually, is Northeastern is not big on group projects. And a lot of my peers were the people that are like, I hate group projects. I like them. I was a big proponent of them, but we didn't have them. So I was just like, okay, that's weird. I guess we'll just do everything on our own. And then I get out into the real world, or even at least grad school in Houston, we did do a lot more group projects. And it's like, wait, our whole job is collaborating and working together. They kind of set us up for failure here by having us all work individually. I wonder how all my classmates who hated group projects are doing, because that's all architecture is one giant group project. Like everything is working together. So I was like, thank God I like working with people. Like that really.
Are you even counting consultants?
Sorry?
Are you even counting consultants?
Yeah, I mean, you got to work with those consultants. You got to figure out how to talk, especially consultants, like, because they're going to think so differently than you because their specialties are completely different from you. They have to think differently to do their job well. It's always interesting to see like what's the best way to get this message across or figure out and make sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
That was definitely the biggest difference for me personally. Yeah, Tess,
so I also, Pooja, I didn't have, but I think one group project. And in school, it's a little different, right? Because some people, like, nobody's paid to be there. And a lot of people can skirt by getting bare minimum out of things too. And so it always makes it hard. Like, there's just always an imbalance there. But one of my mentors now actually told me this after I left school, and I'd known him for a couple of years. He's like, school doesn't teach you how to architecture. School teaches you how to think about architecture, and how to then, problem solve and how to look at things differently, right? Why does the wall need to be there? All of those things, right? And while you're not designing all the time, kind of like what you were saying, Pooja, in the pretty glamorous sense, you are constantly designing. And so that was the biggest kind of difference, I think, in academia. But the working together, that and managing personalities too is very different. And you don't always have to do that in school, right? You just divvy up the work and say, go do it, go do it, go do it. But when you actually have to constantly work with people, you do have to pay attention to personalities and say, okay, what's the best time to reach this person? When is, all of those things. So yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that.
No, that's a totally good point. It kind of connects back to what you started with, which is like in school, no one's being paid to be there. Like you're kind of voluntarily doing it. And so it's like, I'm not going to be considerate necessarily of what other people's needs are, because I'm just going to look out for number one here or whatever. But like when you're in your job and you're working, it's like you literally have to care what everyone else's needs are because you need it to get done. And like this actually matters. It's an actual project and it's reality, so
especially the needs of the client, which you're basically at their mercy as you are working through the project.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Yeah, that was actually something that helped me in college do a lot better in college, was to think of your professor as your client. And so started training me up for reality of, yeah, the client's just going to tell you they want this. They don't care that it's a worse design in your eyes. Now you need to figure out how to make that a good design and achieve all the things that they're now asking you to do. Whereas like in school, my classmates would say like, what do they know? And it's like, well, first off, a lot more than you, but second of all, they're your professor. They're in charge of your success right now. So maybe care about their opinion there. But Kassandra, what about you? Did you notice the difference in office culture, studio culture versus academia as a whole?
Yeah, for sure. I guess piggybacking off of what everybody mentioned and touched on, I think that in academia, there was, at least from my experience, it was really strict. My professors were very strict, so you had to kind of know everything and always have an answer for things. And I feel like in an office culture, everybody has their own specialty. So the stress of not knowing is definitely gone. Like it's okay not to know, and it's okay for it not to be answered right now.
That's such a good point. Yeah, like there are people who are the experts at your firm. Why don't you let them be the experts and teach you? Sure. But yeah, you certainly do not need to bluff your way through an answer or spend hours researching this thing that somebody already knows what the answer is, you know. Such a good point. And I'm remembering now also, Tess, I liked your point about teaching us how to think, because it kind of connects with something Miren was saying earlier about, like, you know, in school they don't teach you how to do the things that you're going to do in your job. And I know that's a constant debate amongst professionals. Like, why are we not teaching students how to do this? And it's like, my personal little soapbox rant is that I think, my guess is that when we're going into college, we are totally learning a different language, totally learning a different way to think, or at least how to channel how we think. Kassandra was already thinking that way when she was a kid, but she didn't know how to channel that into like an actual change. And so they're having to teach us all of that. So then we need to like figure out how to work all that before we can even get into the office. And hey, you only have 4 to 5 years to figure that out. And so the firm will teach you the rest. And I was joking to my coworkers just today, like, oh yeah, back in February when I was working on that, with how little experience I have compared to now, you know, many months later, I'm like, but really, I do have so much more experience than I did in February. Just like the amount I've learned since February is ridiculous. So there's a part of me that's like, why bother teaching us it in school? Like, we're just gonna flood into our brain later. But,
well, and I think that's kind of great about the profession though, right? Because it's like one of those foundational job roles where it started as an apprenticeship, right? You would apprentice with an architect for years and years and years and years before, and he was the master traditionally, right? And then you had to learn from them, right? And it took years of learning, and you got the bare minimum. You just copied drawings or did whatever, right? Same thing for like doctors and lawyers, right? It was kind of an apprenticeship. Like you learn on the job and you learn with real life experience. And I think that's part of what makes it so fun, right? Because you're constantly learning.
I think one of the things, the difference between academia and office that I'm thinking about right now is the what I mentioned before, like about finding your niche as you work versus when you were in school. School for me was really stressful. Designing, and I'm guessing I'm probably not the only one, stressed the hell out of me. I was always thinking, oh, I'm sorry, overthinking every stuff. I feel like everyone was like super critical of everything that I was doing. You need a lot of confidence in architecture school to design something. And I'm not even talking about presenting to your reviewers and your idea, or even comparing yourself, which we all constantly do, to your peers. And because there's always this mind where they're so much better than me. I think only a few people can actually either have a very big ego and say what I'm doing is the best, and then there's a couple of people that are like balanced. We're like, okay, I'm not super good, but I'm not super bad. I think the majority of us are low in confidence, and we're still having those teenage hormones. We're still developing young adults and everything. And so, yeah, I was really nervous starting my first job because I was always so stressful in school. But what I realized is that I loved the office rather than being in studio, because I didn't have to design all the time. I didn't have to design a public library and how the program was going to work and if it was going to be in the right side and if the bathrooms were located centrally or whatnot. At the beginning, it was like, okay, let's start doing this type of red lines, or I need you going back to the parking. We need the parking to be this size, and I need you to lay out the parking this way. And what I liked about, and I'm going to talk, this is just about Boca because every firm is going to be different. Most of my projects started working as puzzles. I love puzzles. So as I was there, I really enjoyed my time because it was more puzzle making, thinking critically in a different way, and not really designing. Now I feel definitely more comfortable designing. Now I kind of like designing. I've had really good mentors, but yeah, that's something that was a big shock for me, from like going to studio to working in an office. So
Yeah, no, I know. Based off of the nodding, I saw some big nods. I feel like we're all totally in agreement with you, and I feel like that's like a different take on that idea of the horror stories we hear in school of you're gonna just be looking at toilets all the time or whatever they say, and flipping that on its head a bit of like, okay, yeah, I'm not going to design an entire building. Thank God I'm not going to design an entire building when I get out of school. Like that sounds like a lot. I don't want to do that, you know. That is different way to look at it, and I totally resonate with that. I know school is very stressful for me too, and I felt the nods with that too, and I wasn't sure I was cut out to be in architecture, and I very much am. I'm good at my job. I know I am, but you know, the messages I got while I was in school, that was kind of what I was talking about with like, I really hope that's not true, but I don't know. I'm just gonna go for it and see what happens, I guess, at this point. And I was like, you know, Boston culture is so different from Texas. I was like, I think Texas, it'll be better. And I'll be back home and stuff at minimum. And it totally was. I wasn't complete. I was maybe making it up. I don't know. Intuition. Who's to say?
Well, and you don't have to be good at like design, like picking colors or picking materials to be good at architecture either.
Exactly.
And that and getting through school is rough for those type of people too, because you don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, but it's there.
Yeah, that is such a good point. Yeah, because that is definitely, I will tell my coworkers, I was like, I don't want to pick the exterior material palette. Can somebody else? I'm thinking in terms of like massing and floor plan changes. I don't know what that wall looks like. You tell me what that wall looks like. It's just like Kassandra said that, like, you know, there are already experts in your firm. There are already people to lean on, and they'll teach you. And I know my firm, they'd certainly want me to develop those skills, but they're not, you know, pressuring me to just know everything on day one, right? So I feel like the last couple questions kind of go together of what do you wish you had known before you graduated, and what advice would you want to give to the next generation? So if you kind of want to mix those, you're welcome to. Give you all a second to think about it, or maybe you came in knowing what you wanted to say. Kassandra?
Yeah, I think something that I wish I knew a little bit more or I practiced a little bit more is I guess communicating amongst the team. I feel like during my college career there was not a lot of group projects, and I feel like communication is such a big aspect of our profession because you are building a building with 5 to 7 other people. So I think really it's not really talked about, and at least in my experience, but communication is a really big one. And what was the other question? Sorry.
Well, actually, it leads. I was going to ask it again anyway, in a way. So what do you wish you had known before, and what advice would you give to the next generation? So you might have other advice you want to give, but I wanted to ask, when you're saying, you know, getting better at communication, is there anything that helped you get better at communicating or knowing how to communicate?
Yeah, I think I in college, kind of what Tess was saying, we kind of just divvy up the task and everyone just goes apart and comes back together with their own results. And I think in the real world, when working at a firm, it's important to kind of communicate throughout your process, because people are curious to see how things are developing, and everybody has an idea of how they want to contribute. So I think just communicating, even if you think you're over communicating, just communicate.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, that's a
always
form of
better.
practicing it. Yeah, sorry, someone was talking, but I didn't. Oh, no, I guess it's Cassandra. Were you saying it's a double-edged sword? Or something
Yeah,
like that?
for sure.
Yeah, yeah. No, it makes sense to practice the thing that you're not totally sure how to do. So give yourself more opportunities to do it.
And
Still
it
kind of trial and
changes.
error. Yeah,
Yeah, like
Yeah.
it changes in every circumstance. Like per team, sometimes it changes, right? And like who your boss is at the moment, right? All of that changes.
absolutely. Absolutely.
One of the things that I can recommend going over Cassandra is that I really recommend being flexible, very flexible and patient. Flexible in the sense, for example, things are always going to be changing in architecture. No matter if it's already the building is already built, things might change. I remember I was working in this project where it had already been built, but the drawings showed something. It was actually constructed another way, and so we had to go in and make the change to how it was actually constructed and cloud it so that we could keep it documented. Or it was being built and it was being built wrong, and they had to do it again. And be very flexible, because things are always going to be changing. I'm currently working on this project that started in 2014. This project has gone through so many iterations of design. This is probably like the 5th time it's actually been designed. Um, and so yeah, be very patient. Especially, I'm gonna recommend this because I know some people stress themselves out. I've seen it in interns where, for example, hey, I need you to tag all the walls in the floor plan. And they go ahead and do that. And then during the next 2 days, we have a client meeting, and they're like, you know what? I want to move the conference here, change it all up. And so as you model everything, um, everything loses all the
All your
dimensions and
annotations
tag, and
go
you're
away.
like, hey,
Yeah.
you know what? You're gonna have to do it again. Why? I just did it like a day ago. I'm like, yeah, but it just changed again. He's just like, why? And I'm like, because the client wanted to change. So I understand the whys, but you do have to be I recommend being very meditative, be flexible, be patient. Architecture is ever changing. And like I said, it might even be built. You might have messed up a code, and the code consultant comes in like, you need to take away the ramps and everything whatsoever, and you're gonna have to redo that area. So we know those horror stories happen, liabilities and all that stuff. As for recommendations for the new generation, apart from that, always ask questions. Make sure to listen to your mentors. Make sure to be very proactive. Always be on top of technology. We know that everything with AI right now is changing our scope and everything. Also be very responsible. I think that's one of the biggest things that you could actually be supportive of your team members. So all that good stuff. So
Great advice.
And I would echo everything Miren said. It's hard to be in a position of a managerial role and have somebody like say, well, why do I have to do this again, right? When like 5 years ago we were that person, right? And we were just doing it over and over and over again, right? And maybe we didn't ask that question, right? Because in hindsight's always 2020, right? And you can look back and say, oh yeah, no, I get that. I understand it was frustrating, right? But like now maybe you're one of the people that's sitting in the meetings and here is all of that, right? And so like if, you know, if you don't understand truly why something changes, then ask the question. My biggest takeaway that I had written down was be curious and stay curious. And just if you're asked to do something, you don't understand it, you're not always going to get the opportunity. Maybe it does need to be done right away, and there's no time for questions at the moment. But on the back end, there always is. And so ask, write it down, like have a running list and be like, hey, can I have 30 minutes of your time? I have a list of questions I'd like to run through, right? And it's really easy to teach somebody like that. As somebody who's being tasked with teaching others, right? Because they're curious, they want to know things, and you're not trying to bog yourself down, say, okay, well, you know, what do I wish I would have known 2 years ago, 5 years ago, right? You have somebody who's like, no, I want to know this now. And it's very easy to kind of regurgitate those kind of things, right? Because then sparks happen in your own brain and you're like, oh yeah, I remember when I did a project like back, you know, when I had first started, and this is what I went through. And it might have been very similar to what somebody's going through now, right? But the only way to do that is to have somebody curious and actively involved in the process too. And so that's what I would say is just stay curious.
Great advice. Kassandra, did you have any, so I know the communication piece was a little bit like what you would wish you had done before, and there was advice in there. I don't know if there was any other advice you wanted to give.
I think, I mean, I think we handled that pretty well.
Yeah, no, I agree. I just wanted to make sure.
And perfectly.
All good.
Yeah.
I think it's breaking up a little bit.
No more comments on my end.
Okay. Okay. I think we're almost at the end at least. So
Yeah,
Kassandra's
so we're
good.
almost at the top of the hour. So if you have any questions, put them in the chat. And I actually have a question for you guys. So while people are thinking of their questions, and this is for all of you, including Pooja, I'm really curious your guys' thoughts on sort of like the interpersonal relationships within an office, especially like Tess had alluded to, I think Miren as well. You know, you're dealing with like different generations and like styles of communicating. And so I think a lot of you guys know me. So I have a son who just started his freshman year in college, and we will talk a lot about things and he'll be like, yeah, this is sort of what, you know, like this is a Gen Z thing to do, you know, and then like, and you'll see like, how is it reacted? Like, have you guys had that happen where maybe like your communication style, you have to adapt it based on like different generations, or like, you know, like a not an official manager, but like someone who was like a little bit higher up, but it was like, oh, you know, in the team. Like, I'm really curious because I feel like those things aren't talked about like ever. So because I'm sharing this, I'm gonna pick on Tess because she and I are good friends, but I'm curious, like how has that come about for you? Like those like personality things.
So yeah, it's become more and more prevalent in what I do day to day. And Jinky, I think you and I have talked about this once or twice. So I hate thinking about it like a generational thing or that kind of thing. I like to approach communication issues as like a case by case thing, and say, okay, if I couldn't see this person and I only listen to like how they're speaking to me, okay, what are they trying to say, right? And if you can kind of look at something kind of as a third person and say, remove yourself from it and say, okay, what are they trying to get at? You become a much better communicator too, because you really listen and you really hear what the other person's saying, as opposed to just responding to something, which things get solved that way and it happens. But as you start to move through kind of your role and maybe you start managing other people, as you take on that responsibility too, it becomes a lot more important to really hear the other person instead of just, you know, respond. Because I'll use a perfect example. The other day I had an intern come to me with a question, And I was in the throes of a deadline, right? And they were helping me on this, and they came to me and asked a question. And they asked one question, and I answered it, and I was like, "Is that it? Or do we need to continue talking about this? Are we okay?" And kind of nodded, but I could tell that there was something else. There was another question on his mind. And because I was so distracted, I was like, "Okay, let's talk later if you need something else." Lo and behold, 2 hours later, he's like, "Okay, I actually have that question now." And if I had taken those 2 seconds to say, "Hey, I can tell that there's something else. Do you want to ask it now, or do you need to go back to the drawing board a minute?" And so it happens everywhere. But short answer is just learn to hear, and not just listen, I would say. I don't know if that answers your question, Jake.
I love that. It's very, very cool. Does anyone else want to chime in? I feel like the personalities in the office are always like, like people have, especially as you get hybridy and like people aren't always in, it creates a different structure.
I've had the luck to kind of be a mentor to different generational interns, but I've been very lucky where all of them have been incredibly responsible and responsive, and they're willing to learn, and they're just interested in learning and all that stuff. So I haven't really had the issue where there's like communication like Gen Z versus millennials or stuff like that. So I think also it helps that my office does tend to go have a nice work balance. So it helps like, yeah, so I'm on the point of view that if you have a deadline, um you might need to put a couple of extra hours the week of the deadline, which I don't think it's completely unreasonable compared to like maybe the rest of the time. Of course, if you have deadlines every week, then maybe you will be dying for a little bit. But at least in my office, there's waves, right? There's waves where like you can definitely do just your 8 hours a day and you're good to go and you leave early and perfect. You can take your lunch hour, no issues whatsoever. And then sometimes that you have your hopping from like deadline to deadline for like the next 2 months. And that's how it's probably gonna be. And then the low season comes back again. So like I said, be flexible. But like I said, I haven't had any issue with interns or the new generation as it is. Maybe next summer or the next 2 summers. We shall see.
So I had put the questions in the chat, and then I also realized we're all a small group, so we could actually just talk. So you don't have to be so formal. I will. Amira had written a question, and I see Erin also raised her hand. I love this. So I'm going to read Amira's question, but if you have more to like expand, you were yesterday, just unmute yourself. But what you wrote is, would you say that the online remote co-op is not ideal in terms of like getting to understand? I imagine like getting to understand that firm's culture. Is that kind of what your question is?
So I've been, in talks with different firms, and I've noticed that a lot of them are going more towards the hybrid after COVID. They realize, working from home is something where people can still be efficient. But I feel like going in as that intern or co-op, I want to be in the place and I want to be able to be there. So I like, oh, hey, like office desk neighbor, I have a quick question, and opposed to like an email. And so I guess my question is like, how have you seen the impact of that? And what would be like your thoughts of how you would go about it, if that makes any sense?
I can talk a little bit. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Miren.
Nice.
So in my office, we are kind of like a very low end work from home type of situation where we can only have 2 days a month. The good thing is that it's pretty flexible. You can pick whichever days you actually want. Our office has been pushing a lot for actually being in the office, but even though we only have those 2 days to work from home, my firm is very flexible in terms of like maybe you need to leave early and you need to make up your hours the next day. And as long, at least my office in Austin is like, as long as you're communicating, you're pretty free to do like what you're doing. But I definitely I do like being in the office. Definitely communication is better than just doing everything virtual. I think in some cases, like maybe if it's a full day of meetings, then maybe that day you might want to work from home, because if you're just gonna be sitting down and looking at the screen, you might as well do it from home, right? Um, but there's moments, I think it just depends on the workload and your project. So maybe if you there's some times where, like, when I know that I'm documenting and I have a deadline and I know what I need to do, sometimes I just prefer to work from home, or I would like to have the possibility to work from home because I work more quote unquote efficiently at home. I wake up earlier. I don't have to really super dress up, no traffic whatsoever. I just like wake up, jump on my computer and just like work, 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 work. Of course, then there's a sense that you might work from like 7 to 7 p.m. You work more than what you were expecting. But if it's for a deadline, then I'm good. If it's like when I know there's going to be like more design based, more talking with your coworkers, I think it's definitely better to be in the office. And even sometimes for the deadlines, maybe the 2 days before the deadline, it's good to be in the office because you're gonna have to be like, hey, can you print this? Can you do this? Can you do that? So it's just better face to face and just actually typing everything. So it just depends. It depends on the project and depends on what you're doing. I do think I wish there was a little bit more flexibility with work from home, but I don't know what Tess and Cass have to do have what their work from home the policy is for their firm. So
Yeah, we're a majority. We're in the office. We get 1 day remote a week, and so it's like I might be biased towards yeah, you should be in the office because I like being in the office. So I understand that, but I think especially when you're just starting out, that's so helpful to just be able to hear all the conversations. That was actually a big reason my firm did go into the office sooner than a lot of firms, because they felt like the people at entry level were struggling and not able to ask as many questions and learn as much. Um, but maybe if you're talking to a firm, you can ask them, how do you make sure to foster a culture where interns and entry level employees are able to ask questions or check-in? Do you have one-on-one? Like, what systems do they have in place? Or maybe it's, if you end up at one, whoever's in charge of you, you're asking them those questions. Hey, I would really like to be able to make sure we have check-in times or something, if that's something. Obviously the office culture is non-existent when you're remote, but we were able to, in quarantine, we did some things to keep culture a little bit alive. We tried, dark times, but yeah.
Yeah, I think asking a firm is super important because that'll tell you also a lot during the interview. If you ask that question, because that one, it shows that's important to you, but then it also kind of puts the employer on the spot to have to answer that question. And if they don't have an answer for it, there's a strong chance they don't have those systems in place. And then that goes back to your values and what you need from a firm. I would say I graduated the year of COVID. And so I was still in my internship year at Kirksey when COVID hit, and then hired on full time. So I had already been there for months at this point, almost a year, working part time. And I think that was kind of the only thing that saved me in the first couple months, because I immediately was thrown on full time to projects right out of school. And I was like, okay, I'm lost here, but I knew who to go contact to because I had already been there for a year. And so that was a little different, but I will say that Kirksey does require interns for the summer internship program to be in office full time. And there is a reason for that. It's because there is such fostering and development that happens when you're in the office, and you can go ask somebody and say, oh, I don't know the answer to that, but Jim across the hall will, right? And that is so important. They learn your face, they learn who you are, they learn how many questions you ask and how curious you are too. It's much easier to tell that of a person in person versus virtual. So
I just wanted to add as well. I think just summing up everything, I think obviously it's what you value the most, but I also think that starting off, it's really important because you do have a lot of those questions. But me personally, I think that I've had I think having the ability to work from home while you're either doing office meetings, or for me it's like, you're just going to be producing, and we've already kind of gotten the training wheels off. I have experience and I know kind of what needs to get done. Having that flexibility has been really, really nice, especially I guess starting off. Maybe not super early in my career. I think being in office early in my career has helped me, but being able to have that option was great.
All right, Erin had first patiently had her hand up and then popped in the question. So I'll read the question, but just this is couch talk. You could just chime in here, but I'm going to read this just since it's here. So I'm an older grad student with a 2-year-old and very protective of my personal time. I will chime in and say I don't think there's a reason to couch like owning your personal time. You can have any reason. You don't. It's not just because you have kids, but I totally understand. In my previous career, I knew to look for certain language in a job post that signal that an organization may have less than ideal work-life balance. Can you share anything that I should be looking for when searching for the position? So is it fast-paced, dynamic? What are those keywords that make you know like you're going to be ground to the to the bone? Nimble, nice. So what are your guys' thought? Live work balance? I'm going to chime in and say I don't think this is the domain exclusively of mothers of young children. I think everyone deserves to have your downtime, but chiming in specifically, what are the red flags, beige flags? What are the flags that Erin needs to look at when she's starting to interview, work her network, etc.?
I think when you're in the interviewing process, asking those questions and really paying attention to the response and how thoughtful they are of the response really tells you how much they value that in the firm. So I think me personally, a lot of job descriptions I feel like don't really touch on the culture of the firm. It's really like what they're kind of looking for, and you don't really get a sense of what the firm or who the firm is until you start to go into interviews.
So for that, kind of build on Kassandra's point, is talk to people, ask people who work there, and ask around as much as you can. Ask your professors in school, say, do you know anybody working at this firm? Make it known that you're asking for information on firms, and it will start coming your way. That's what I did going to the career fairs. I would ask people who I knew who were 2 years out from school and said, hey, do you know somebody who works at this firm? No, I don't, but so-and-so knows so-and-so who is working at that firm. Let me get you in touch with them. Because that would be the best way to really know what the firm culture is like. But also taking that with a grain of salt, depending on the size of the firm. Because like, I'll use Kirksey as an example. The team that I'm on operates slightly differently than like another team in the office, right? But the overall firm culture supports like mothers who have to work and have to leave early. If you have a doctor's appointment, to go leave for that and come back, right? The firm as a whole supports those things, right? And so that would be able to come through with anybody who you talk to. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think unfortunately with architecture, our job postings are not very descriptive of culture. I think the best you can do is if you're looking at a company's website or social media or whatever, LinkedIn posts are very popular. I know, at least for K-12 firms, that if they describe their employees as people and like whole human beings, that's like a good sign. They're not just there to do the work or whatever. But even if they don't describe them that way, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, because maybe they just aren't savvy enough to know to do that, right? But I do think a big part of it is interview. My favorite interview question to ask is, if you think of who your ideal, or not ideal, who your best employee is, what makes them your best employee? And if they say they're here every night till 8 p.m., they work weekends, I can always count on them to drop everything for me. If they do these things, you don't want to work at that firm, or at least not with that person that you're interviewing. Like if that's the person that's getting the awards and stuff like that, like, oh, you guys are valuing kind of things that are not in line with my values, let's say, and prioritizing boundaries and stuff like that. I actually was not able to chime in on the advice thing, but that was my big piece of advice, is setting your boundaries early and like sticking to them, but also doing that in a way where you're being understanding of other people's needs. So, hey, I'm actually heading out right now or in 30 minutes, but I could do that tomorrow. I can get that done by 10 tomorrow. Is that fine? But like being able to like give them another option, because I've never seen anyone care like if I'd say it like that. But if I'm just like, no, no one's gonna like that, right? So my team knows that if a teams message me after 6, I'm not getting it. I'll see it in the morning. Like I have these set boundaries, and there are other people who don't mind getting teams messages at 8, and they will talk to you at 8 o'clock at night. So, and that's their choice. I'm not doing that, right? So that's been my experience at my firm that I'm at now, that I can set those boundaries and people will respect it. But I did go to a firm interview, and the guy, it was like a small firm, and the guy said, yeah, and like I'm so proud of him. I've started to see him come in on the weekends. Usually it's just me in here, but he's taking on more ownership. I'm really seeing him grow, and I love him, doing that. And we'll order dinner whenever we have a deadline coming up. And I'm like, I'm so glad you guys are not actually hiring right now, because I do not want to work here,
I guess I'll just also add, kind of just reiterating what Tess said, don't be afraid to like go on LinkedIn and do some stalking. That was actually how I met Janky. I was just like going into Kirksey, and I really got into it, and I saw she was super active. And yeah, and a lot of people are willing to speak to you and help you out. When they hear your voice, especially, I think our voice has a lot of power. So don't be
Yes,
afraid.
I will also make a plug for, in addition to the virtual series, if you're available, we are having an in-person meeting on the 10th. So those of you who are able to make it, it's going to be hosted at McKinney York. So it is in Austin. So it depending on where you are and if you're able to make it, but it is a networking event for students, all our speakers, moderator, WiA folks. This came up yesterday too in the discussion about like I think the number one thing is networking, and it doesn't have to be done in like a self-aggrandizing sort of like, sort of sleazy way. It's just like getting to know people. And that's how that works. Like Kassandra and I knew each other through LinkedIn. She actually is working for my husband's firm. So we didn't have room for her at the time. And the same thing, it's like the industry is so tiny. But I would say like keep an eye out, because you can see that you can register the same way you registered for today if you want to do the networking. It's going to be really fun. Alexandra, raise your hand. You just chime in.
Yes, no worries. I just wanted to add, because I'm a mom and I could relate and to what your question was, Erin. And when I came to Austin to look for work, one of the reasons that I moved out of New York and moved to Austin was because I was craving the life balance, especially with a young toddler. And my son at that time was 18 months. Well, it was a year. And by the time I actually found my landing and where I am right now at Restructure Studio, which is an all-women's firm, we're all moms. And so they understand what's going on. And if something happens, and we do have hybrid schedules and things like that. So even if you have to, and I've said it before in the past, I know we're all trying to advocate for ourselves and get more money, but even if you have to downgrade to a certain degree to have that balance, do it, because at the end of the day, it's your family, it's your values is what you're working for. And it's not that you can't, you can still advocate for yourself. You can still get and then balance with like getting involved with local chapters and other things. And to Jenkins regard, like we're going to have the happy hour on Friday to meet all of the people, but also women in architecture is not only for people in architecture. There's many people here that are not architects. We have interior designers, we have landscape art. Yeah, Janky's not an architect, including our own chair-elect currently, Ashton Brooks. She is not an architect, but she is running Women in Architecture. So we're here for everybody. And it's to support each other. And if the Colored Salon Series is your thing, it's your thing. And then we also had a Motherhood panel in May that now we're going to have an in-person Motherhood panel at the end of this month. So things like that it's always, even if it's not, correct, like, to architecture, it always relates, it always resonates, and it always can help. And, you might learn something there that you didn't know did exist.
I think I will say one thing. There was this interesting study called like the Missing 32, which kind of looks at like the drop of women in architecture coming out of school and like looking all the way and like all the way through their career, kind of like looking at the points within the pipeline that are leaky. And, I think studio culture is a huge part that was identified as like not really working for a lot of people. And I think it doesn't work for a lot of people, but it's just in particular, if you have like a greater share of like parental responsibilities or household responsibilities, it's just like impossible. I will say though that nowadays, I mean, go to the AIA board right now, the job board, it is bumping. We're in a different job market. We're now like live work balance is, I think, an amenity that you can start pushing for. And I agree with Alexandra's point. I did that too. I took a huge pay cut to have flexibility with when the boys were little. I don't know if I need to have done that now. Like, I think I could, like, there would have, like, I could have negotiated that given that, like, how hybrid works. But back then, like, it was a choice I made. But I think I would argue that, like, there's like pet parents, there's some people who are like, it's not just because you have a human being that you're taking care of. Like,
yeah.
Don't you agree?
It could be a relative too. Like a lot of people, like, which I didn't find out until you get pregnant, that pay leave, like by the US.
As the MLA,
yeah, it's family, because it could be a sick parent or somebody. Again, it could be many things. But and then also like what Pooja put in there too, like, you can compensate too with like, what about some personal time and things like that? Because, and again, that doesn't mean that you cannot go back to getting whatever you wanted, and you can be as equally as happy being paid more or paying less. Again, it's just more as what your family situation is.
And I want to clarify, like, I'm happy with the amount I make. I think I'm being compensated fairly. I know that some of my friends left my firm because they got job offers with more. Meanwhile, I'm not really responding to recruiters. I'm very happy with my job. It gives me I find a lot of joy in it. Like, I'm just so happy with it. Why would I look elsewhere? And I know that some people advise, always look elsewhere. Always. I don't know. I don't have energy for that. I'm good.
No, these are really good conversations, because I think your point about boundaries is so important. It helps you live your values if you decide. And I think asking around helps you figure out, like, what's the vibe of the firm? What do they value? How do people get promoted? I feel like we have at Kirksey, they're very clear about how people get promoted. So you don't just sort of wonder, like all of a sudden someone's made associate and you're just like, how did that happen? It's like, it's like they talk about it. And so you don't have to wonder, like, and is it, sometimes I think if you have a manager who doesn't know what to measure, it's really easy to measure time versus, like, I sometimes feel like, why am I being punished because I'm efficient? And like in my old job, I was like, I could do this so much faster. It's like, it's like a 30-second text will land us a project. Like, why am I being dinged for that? Like, should I have said it took me 3 hours? Like, no, it's all good.
Yeah, to your point.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
No, go.
Oh, to your point, it really matters where you're at, and it also matters what you do when you get there. Because you might walk in with like I'm gonna set the boundary. I'm out at 5 and I'm not answering any teams until 7 or 8 the next morning, right? You might walk in with those expectations, and you might, upon like starting working, say, you know what, I need to work a couple extra hours here and there, and I'm really okay with doing that. And you also might be one of those people after starting working that is there till 7 every night. And that is a choice that you can make, being in the right place. Finding a firm that values that you, one, do that, want to do that, or otherwise, too. And so it's all about kind of how you frame the question, too. The A lot of firms right now are pushing for I'll just use the air quotes, the work-life balance, right? It is what you make it, though, and it is kind of where you're at. Not all firms do, though. And so you kind of have to know yourself well enough to say, you know what, I can put in a couple years at a firm that is going to push me. It's not going to have the same work-life balance as maybe this other firm. Am I going to get what I want to out of this job, though? And you can walk into that knowing that as well, and make a decision from there too. And that is totally valid as well, if you want to do that, because the experience that comes from those jobs too also is pretty critical sometimes. So it just depends. I will say that. Devil's advocate.
Amira, you have another comment or question?
I just had a question in regards of like looking for other firms. I know like word of mouth is probably the best way to go about knowing like what type of firm might be best inclined before you get to that interview phase. Or maybe I know I've been doing a lot more career fair, but obviously not every single firm comes. So what would be like your recommendations of like being able to best find out about firms in the like truest sense? Because you can go to the website and read about them, but I mean, it's kind of like a dating website, everyone just puts their best foot forward. They're not going to say the bad and ugly stuff. So what would like you guys recommend for that?
Networking.
Okay.
Talking to recent grads, going to the WiA happy hour that Jinky mentioned. That's how I found out about a lot of firms that I was starting to interview with. And I was like, oh, wait, maybe I don't want to work there. I'm going to still do the interview, but I heard some stuff that I'm kind of questioning now, right? Talk to as many people as you can. Message some recent grads that are working at the firms and say, hey, I'm graduating soon. I'm looking into your firm. I kind of just want a take from somebody who's currently working there. And you can go 1 year out from graduation. Maybe they're people that you're familiar with, right? So you're at least going to have a couple mutual connections too. So it's not just like a complete random stranger, but don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah. I would say get involved with your alumni chapter. I did not go to Texas. I did not go to UT anywhere here. I went to Savannah College of Art and Design. And the first thing I did when I was moving from New York to Austin was connect to who are the SCAD people that live in Texas, who are in Austin, and can I contact them? And that's like, hey, I haven't seen you in who knows how many years. I graduated from my university, but I'm looking to connect where is the best place to look for jobs or things like that. And then also AIA chapters always have job boards. So if it's not something that, that might resonate, they have interior design jobs there. They have architectural jobs, landscape jobs, and like administrative jobs. So always look for those things. Yeah. And then, connection, network. And then again, each city is different. New York is a faster pace. People don't have time for coffee, but here in Texas, they do. Email them. I want to message you. Can we go for coffee? I have some questions. So yes, do it. Don't be afraid. What's the best that can happen? They say yes.
But like even the response could even be telling, right? Like odds are if they don't respond, they could just legit be busy and have like mentally replied which is what happens to me. And then you realize like, oh, dang, I didn't actually send that. Like we talked about it yesterday. But if someone says something that's more negative, it could be a sign like maybe, or if they're so busy, they can't have coffee, like maybe this is like they need to hire more people and everyone can have more balance, right? So I think your point is a really good one to like people want to help too.
And don't take no for an answer. If one person says no, or if to Jinky's point, if somebody doesn't respond, because sometimes I'm guilty of that. If I get some random message from somebody I've never met before, I'm a little like, I don't know you. I don't know if I should respond, right? And sometimes that throws me off, right? So don't take no for an answer. If you don't hear back from somebody, go ask somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Worst that can get out about you is that you're curious and you're trying to ask questions.
Yeah. And then you can connect with all of us on LinkedIn. Like, and we can help you. Like there. Like
Yeah. And don't be afraid to like send us messages and say, I saw that you have this connection that might have this other connection, because I do get that all the time too. Can you connect me with this person? And they will do it.
And bring it
Yeah,
to
definitely.
events too.
Yeah,
Bring
don't get
like-
discouraged from, sorry, go ahead, Tess.
No, I'm done. Sorry.
Sorry. Don't get discouraged from no responses, because I didn't notice, but after I've been working in I keep on saying real life, like
in the
as
adult
professional.
world.
After working in the professional world, it's not uncommon for people to like spam us with either like a consultant because they want to sell things to us and things like that. So it is sometimes a little bit difficult for us to filter through all that. So just don't take it personally. I feel like architecture is pretty open to helping.
This has been a fun. We are at time, so I'm calling it. Thank you guys. This was such a lively conversation. My speakers, Tess, Miren, Kassandra, thank you so much. And my rockstar moderator, Pooja, I'm so happy you were able to do this. You were just meant to lead this conversation. If you're available tomorrow, we will be discussing being the only in the room. And I think that's going to be a really interesting discussion. We're going to talk about like diversity, as well as just like, how to create allyship and just like a variety of different topics, kind of like flowing from there. And then the last day on Thursday of the Salon Series, it's going to be Pathways Beyond Traditional Practice. So we've gathered a bunch of our friends who officially have architecture degrees, but do not practice traditional architecture. So we have folks who are in business development, branding. One of my friends is at Icon, the 3D house printing, and she's talking about her path. So you're going to hear a variety of origin stories and like the point where they kind of went beyond, like, tried something different. And of course, I have to thank our WiA chair-elect, Alexandra, Karina. None of this would happen if you didn't come up with the idea of call to action and our salon series. So thank you guys. For those who are still around, feel free to connect with us. I hope to see you throughout the week. Again, don't forget, if you're able to do that happy hour on Friday, it's going to be so much fun, but it's not our only chance to connect. But if you're able to, please come. So with that, I'm going to say good night. Thank you all for just being here and being a part of this. I hope this was helpful. And if you have ideas for next year, please let me know. We'd love to kind of crowdsource how we can make the salon series better, and like, what else do you wish you didn't know? So that's kind of, you could fill us in on that. All right. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.